Hey, Mazzy here. It's the Music Stupid, another episode, number 43, I believe. I want to subtitle this one because it's a little unusual where the records I'm pulling together have some overlap in terms of one particular musician. So I'm going to subtitle this, It's the Drummer Stupid. All the records here have one thing in common, that some of the drumming, or all the drumming in a couple of cases, is by Jim Gordon, a drummer who died about a year ago and who had a really tumultuous life, ended in tragedy, and tragedy happened, halfway through his lifetime. But that's going to be saved for another video, because the influence of this video and me playing these records was about a book I literally just finished this morning called Drums and Demons, A Tragic Journey of Jim Gordon, by Joel Selvin. Joel Selvin has written a number of rock and roll books. I grew up listening to him, and he's not that much older than me, being the music critic, the rock critic for the most part for the San Francisco Chronicle. And he just has this book coming out on Jim Gordon's life. So that'll be later. This is really about the music. There is a link below in the description. Check this out because it's so amazing. It's a playlist that Joel Selvin put together on Spotify, and I listened to it all straight through, and it's a lot of these great records that Jim Gordon played on, a wide variety of genres. Hit records probably 90% of. But I picked 5 records here and 145, and I think this shows sort of the wide variety of music that Jim Gordon played on. I'm going to start out with this record. This is the Mason Williams phonograph record on Warner Brothers record. Mason Williams was a classical guitar player and a comedy writer. He wrote for the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, and as well as some other TV shows later on as well. And all of a sudden, he did this, I guess, this out-of-the-box hit, almost like a novelty record that became a massive hit, won Grammys for Best Instrumental, just several Grammys in 1968, 1969. There he is, comedy writer. And this is an interesting record. My guess is most people I know who have this record have only heard classical gas, not the entire record. It's kind of a Baroque pop record. It's sunshine pop. Jim Gordon also not only plays all over this, played around this time, or actually a couple years before, with Harper's Bazaar, Feeling Groovy. This is produced by Mike Post, who was a friend of Jim Gordon's, and brought him in on this record. And both of them were 23 years old when Mike Post produces and Jim Gordon plays on this. This is really it's really a tour de force. As overproduced it is, it doesn't have a thick wall of sound like the Phil Spector thing. It's got, 37 musicians on it. There's an orchestra. There's a great rhythm section of a lot of studio musicians at the time all over this record. People you followed and people who played who were studio staples in Los Angeles and Hollywood in the 1960s. But the drumming on this is so powerful and so up there and out there throughout all this. Some amazing drumming on this record. So just for the drumming alone. But of course, Classical Gas is this double-track guitar piece with him on 6-string guitar and 12-string guitar, and the orchestra builds in. But when that drumming kicks in, it really ups it a notch. And it was a huge, huge hit. The rest of it is very sunshining. There's some vocals on it. It's very, in that realm of the stuff that was happening with, Harry Nilsson and maybe a little Randy Newman, that type of thing. It's just an unusual record. It's got great liner notes by Stan Cronin, who was the promotional writer and copywriter on all those Lost Leader records for Warner Brothers records. He had a great sense of humor. His book on the record business in the 1960s, 1970s is a must-read for anyone who loves to read about the height of the record industry in Hollywood in those days, and of course Burbank, because of where Warner Brothers came from. So an interesting record, an unusual record, sunshine pop, Mason Williams. Next is one of my all-time favorite records, and this first is my original copy, 1971's Alone Together. Dave Mason, formerly of Traffic, the in and out and in and out and in and out in Traffic. I just did a feature on Traffic, and I always loved his contributions. He had a rock and roll sound, a little bit of a country sound, obviously played around this time with Delaney and Bonnie and Friends. Again, Jim Gordon. Jim Gordon is not the only drummer on here. You have Johnny Barbada, you have Jim Keltner. But a couple of tracks. Again, the original copy of this album did come out on this wonderful marble thing. This wasn't happening in those days like it is today. This was a very rare occurrence. But of course, most of the copies early on came on this. But the song, Only You Know and I Know, became somewhat of a modest hit. Delaney and Bonnie covered the song. The sound of the guitars on this, the drumming, obviously, for all three drummers on different tracks is just sublime. It's an amazing album. Of course, he played with Jimi Hendrix. He played with Traffic, as I said, and should have been a bigger artist later on, too, because he switches to Columbia Records, and his records were more hit and miss. This was co-produced by Dave Mason and Tommy LaPuma, who did a lot of jazz, pop records, did Dan Hicks and the Hot Licks for Blues Thumb. This is the best record. But I do want to say, the one track, obviously, Only You Know and I Know, that opens up, the drumming on that is sublime by Jim Gordon. He does a shuffle on that makes a song, that pushes that song forward. So when you listen to that song again and go in that playlist, because that song is included, it's just amazing. It's something he came up with, and he was one of the, a popular studio drummer around into the 70s, and we'll get into that in that other interview with Joe Sullivan. But I do want to show this copy, because in 1995, the height of the CD era, MCA did a series, MCA Records, Universal Records, now we know it, Being Analog, MCA Returns to Vinyl. Didn't last long. I don't even know how many titles. The liner notes here are by Michael Fremer from The Tracking Angle. This was cut from all analog tapes by Kevin Gray. As of this video recording, there are 15 copies available at a fairly reasonable price on Discogs. I played this again today after playing my original. Now, some people say that original marble copy is noisy. Mine's actually pretty good. And again, this is the Music Stupid. However, I have to do a shout out for this copy of this MCA. This was friggin' amazing. I forgot how good this sounded. I think I got this about 10 years ago. It doesn't have the marbleization, which is great. It's the whole 180 gram thing, cut by Kevin Gray. But if you love this record, you're not going to find a better vinyl version of this record. I don't know if Michael Fremer is watching. My guess is he would agree. We'll see. But it's incredible. The acoustic guitars, the drumming, the electric guitars, such a wonderful record. My guess is if you snooze, you lose. And those, it'd be interesting to see how those Discog numbers go down, if they do, if anyone actually reaches out and buys it. But again, if you like this record, this is a wonderful copy of it. Again, Jim Gordon's not on every track playing drums, pushing it, but Only You Know and I Know, and I think Just a Song might be another one. And it's just sublime. His drumming, he is one of the most melodic drummers of the session people. Of course, one of my favorite drummers, also the studio drummer, is Jim Keltner of the in the 1970s as well. And Keltner, obviously, he comes up and is quoted in this book I just read too. But again, that's for later in the week. Nielsen Schmielsen. Richard Perry all of a sudden takes Nielsen, who had a bunch of hits on RCA Records. Obviously, Everybody's Talking, the Fred Neil song was a hit, was the theme for Midnight Cowboy. He had written a song about New York City for that movie, for Schlesinger's film Midnight Cowboy. And that was supposed to be the title track, but instead they used his version of the Fred Neil song. So his song is at the closing credits on that. But this song really changed things for Harry Nilsson. It's a wonderful record. The huge hit was Without You, that ballad, written by Badfinger. That was a hit for Badfinger by Ham and Evans. And it wasn't really a hit, though, for Badfinger. This is it. It's ironic that the two biggest hits Harry Nilsson ever had are the two songs that he didn't write, Without You and Everybody's Talking. And he is an incredible writer. But this changed things. This has all his LA friends at the time, has Ringo Starr, it has Klaus Voormann on bass and guitar, it has Chris Spedding, it has Jim Price on horns, of course, Jim Gordon on drums on some of the tracks as well. Now, the ones that stand out that I need to call out is the opening track, Gotta Get Up, the song Coconut, that rhythm he has on Coconut, the lime in the coconut, that rhythm was created by Jim Gordon on that track. The one that explodes on this is Jump Into the Fire, which is that long track that later would be used in the film Goodfellas, to just amazing cocaine-fueled scene in the Goodfellas film, the Martin Scorsese film there. But on this song, you have Harry Nilsson, Jim Gordon, Herbie Flowers on bass, John Uribe on guitar, Chris Spedding on guitar, and Klaus Voormann. And the drumming on that, the percussion on that, the drive on that. Now remember, this is a time, and from the 60s into the 1970s, this is from 1971 as well, there was no click tracks. Drummers weren't listening to click tracks. They were doing this on their own. Jim Gordon had friggin' amazing timing and drove these records. You know, doesn't take away. The thing about Jim Gordon, he wasn't flashy when he didn't need to be flashy. He just kept amazing time. Hardly anyone else in those days as a studio musician kept that time so tightly as Jim Gordon on that. So Harry Nilsson, of course, Nilsson Schmielsen was a huge record for Harry Nilsson. The sequel to this, Son of Schmielsen, there we go. Almost lost the name of that. This is the MoFi copy, double 45. It's fantastic. I have an original RCA, which is great. I believe might have been on Dynaflex, can't remember. This is a record that I just never realized that Jim Gordon was on until I read this book. And this is Judy Collins, 1968. Huge record, actually. Who knows where the time goes? Of course, the title track, this is a beautiful record. The title track written by Sandy Denny from Fairport Convention. You know, she's one of the great interpreters of folk pop music in the 60s into the 70s. And, you know, she has her detractors in terms of her voice is almost too beautiful and clean, but how can that be too beautiful and clean? But this really strikes that balance of folk and pop to a T. Jim Gordon is all over it. And in that book, this is one of the favorite projects Jim Gordon played on. And it's ironic because it's not a flashy record. It's not flashy in terms of the drumming on it. But that song, Who Knows Where the Time Goes, is sublime. That is one of two songs that's on that playlist that's linked below. But the song on here that really is one of my all-time favorite songs, and that is Someday Soon. Written by Ian Tyson of Ian and Sylvia. They did the Canadian folk duo. But it was a song that was late to this album because I think it became the first single on this album. And it's an amazing blend of folk and country pop. They were recording in the studio. Steve Stills was brought in to work on this album in 1968. Great musician in his own right. Of course, him and Judy Collins. There's attraction there. Of course, Steve Stills would write Sweet Judy Blue Eyes for this beautiful blue-eyed woman and singer for her. But he was playing a song, singing a song, Someday Soon, and she knew it, joins in, and they play it and put it on the record. And it's the definitive version of that song, and I just adore that song. And the drumming on it, here's what's great about it. The drumming is nothing flashy. It's almost like this rim snare thing that Jim Gordon, another thing I didn't know, did when he played on Lonesome Fugitive on the Merle Haggard song. So it's got that Merle Haggard kind of cowboy country sound, and his drumming is just that tapping going on, and it's so beautiful. Of course, it has James Burton on guitar, and Sneaky Pete on pedal steel. It is a perfect song. In my Instagram, I included the whole song, so if you follow me on Instagram, Mazzy's Music, search back, and I play the whole thing there. But go to the playlist and listen. This is a wonderful record, 1968, on Elektra Records, of course, produced by David Anderle. Who knows where the time goes? Judy Collins. I believe there's a couple of Leonard Cohen songs on here. Yeah, Bird on the Wire, and I think My Father are the two, or is it Song of Isaac? There's two Leonard Cohen songs on here. There you go. And lastly, I can't really talk about Jim Gordon's drumming without talking about Derek and the Dominoes. Of course, we can talk about Layla and other love songs. When we get into that conversation later with with Joel Sullivan, we'll talk about Layla and the controversy there, because the song Layla, the song credit goes to Eric Clapton and Jim Gordon, and there's a lot of shit about that that happened when the piano outro, but that's for another day, another time. This live album, this is my promo copy. The drumming on this, I mean, the whole band is tight. Bobby Whitlock, of course, on keyboards. You've got Carl Rattle on bass, Jim Gordon there on drums, and of course, Eric Clapton. Drug-fueled time, and again, we'll get into that on another video. Tempestuous time. After this, was there going to be more of Derek and the Dominoes? Didn't happen, never happened. Wonderful bluesy rock and roll on here. Why Does Love Got to Be So Sad? The drumming on that, Got to Get Better in a Little While, the drumming, Let It Rain, everything. Every track on here is great. The whole band is tight. It's amazing considering what they were all going through at the time, how this actually worked, and they made a pretty successful live record out of it. So love this record. A little fun little tidbit here. When they were doing the photo shoot here, it took Bobby Whitlock to loan Jim Gordon this leather fringe coat, because he said Jim Gordon had no cool clothes, so he loaned him this coat for the cover photo shoot. Now, I don't make light of what became of Jim Gordon and the situation he went through, and the mental illness that he experienced pretty much his entire life, and how drumming really drowned that out. That was the thing that kind of kept him going, amazingly so, but to a tragic end. But this was an amazing drummer, an amazing record here. And the very end, let me just add one more thing here. Here's one single I just wanted to throw in as an extra that Jim Gordon plays drums on. And I had forgotten he actually played on this. And this is Power to the People. He played with 3 of the Beatles. He played on All Things Must Pass. He played with Ringo. And, of course, he played with John Lennon here. Never played with Paul McCartney. But he met Paul McCartney, and they talk about that a little bit in the book. But I do want to end up with this, cliche of a song, but just the drumming and the power of this song is just pretty amazing at the time. So, Power to the People, John Lennon, Plastic Ono Band, with that intense drumming of Jim Gordon on this one. So, thanks again for watching. Put comments down below. Mazzy loves you.